Welcome to the first episode of my new podcast, Leaders on a Mission. I'm Simon Leach, and for the last 7 years, I've been inspired by working with leaders driven by a mission of creating a sustainable and healthy impact on the world. I've started this podcast to share stories from some of the leaders across the world of life sciences and agri-tech, food agri-technology, about their mission, their journey, and about creating an impact on the world. Now, every time I think of or I speak to my first guest, it puts a big smile on my face. The first thing to say about introducing Rick is that he's real testament to good guys do win. And, Rick Greubel, has had a very interesting career, unique career with global positions at Monsanto, Tyson Foods, DSM, Keimer Biotech, transitioning 2 years ago into a broader portfolio role, which includes board positions at Chemin Industries, MI Proteins, as well as working as an operating partner for Payne Schwartz. Now, Rick is a jet setter, and having lived and worked in 5 countries, he loves red wine and skiing and can be frequently found on the Telluride Golf Club in Colorado, even after it's been snowing. So he's married to Ellen, he has 4 kids, and I actually remember meeting Rick for the first time at a bar in a hotel in San Francisco. I just think, it was an interesting meeting you. I just hugged you. And it was just such a great delight. And I don't go around hugging, professional contacts of mine, to be honest, too often, but it was just a natural kind of thing to want to do, basically, when I met you. So thanks for joining the show, Rick. And how's life?
Oh, Simon, thank you very much. That was so kind. I remember the hug, honestly.
Do you?
And it may sound a bit strange, but it's because I think we had a 3 or 4 or 5 year relationship of telephone calls and conversations, emails, etc., before we ever met in person.
Absolutely. But still, I do talk to plenty of people for 3, 4, 5 years, and I don't hug them when I meet them, in fairness. I don't know about you. I don't know. Are you a hugger? I mean, you've had,
I did live in Latin America for 9 years, so yes,
you did.
That's true. That's true.
You did. Yeah.
I'm a hugger.
No, it was great. It really was. It was great. And I think I'd love to, go back, actually, right back to the kind of start for you. And I'm thinking, Master Rick Greubel growing up, just wanting to understand, what some of the major influences were that shaped, your ideas and inspiration, really.
Yeah, I'd say it's funny when you reflect back, right, on why did you turn out the way you are, for good and for bad, right? And I, without a doubt, I had my parents were children of German immigrants, both of them, one German, one Austrian, but Germanic, and having that influence in my childhood of a set of rules, values, guidelines, and if you tried to waver a little bit outside of them, there was usually a punishment that was involved. There was something about doing things the right way that was instilled at a very, or at least doing things their way, maybe not the right way, but their way. So this ability to be unsatisfied if you didn't achieve something the way you wanted it to, that the outcome wasn't there, you were dissatisfied. And that clearly had an influence on me. My father was quite an outgoing, extroverted person, and with a huge focus on customer service and interpersonal skills and treating people the right way with respect and value, and listening to them to understand. That clearly influenced me, and I've been kind of a customer satisfaction maniac my whole career. And then growing up in an environment, and I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and grew up in the southern part of the state, a place called Lake of the Ozarks, and that was a very narrow place. And so I had this I don't know, drive to see something bigger, to do something different than what most of my, childhood peers were thinking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And when did that kind of, when did that reveal itself to you? When was it apparent that it was you were going to
Just
fly
before,
off?
probably just before university, probably just before university.
Yeah,
Um, I listen, we didn't have the resources to do that. I didn't travel much. We didn't take holidays as a child. And so I went off to university. That was a big deal, to leave home and to actually go away to school. And I had to finance it myself, right? And that was probably the first time I learned I could actually do it, right? I can do this on my own. And from there, it was, okay, what else? What else?
so you kind of, it sounds like you grew in confidence from that. It sounds like.
For sure, in confidence.
Yeah,
Probably a little bit incompetence as well, but for sure in confidence that, okay, I can make this my own way.
yeah, yeah. And what did your dad do for your mum and dad do for careers, actually?
Yeah, well, my father worked for 20 something years at Anheuser-Busch. My mother was a bookkeeper.
Okay.
My father worked at the brewery. He was his first job when he was 18. He was Augie Bush's elevator boy.
Right,
So
was he?
the son of the founder of, he was the elevator, when they used to have elevator boys, right? Anyway,
Had lots of beer in the
and
house. You must have had lots of beer in the house growing up,
there
right?
was always beer in the house. Yes, that's true. It was given away. It was given away in those days. Um, and then he ended up spending a lot of time in the food and beverage industry. So hotel and restaurant management, food and beverage management, those type of things that are really, he wasn't home, right? Working nights, weekends, all those things that resorts and hotels, but very customer centric type of responsibilities.
Right, and that clearly rubbed off at such a young age, essentially. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no doubt about it. The
yeah,
other thing, the whole immigrant family, it was my grandfather. Every time I made a change or a move in my career, I always looked at it from the perspective of, how much risk am I really taking?
mm,
Because often things seem like they're high risk, to make an international move or to accept a different responsibility in an area that maybe you don't have experience in, or to take a job where the business or the area is actually not performing well, and you're charged with fixing it. Okay. I always reflected back on the risk my grandfather took when in 1930 he immigrated from Germany to the U.S. with $20 in the bottom, riding steerage in a cruise ship, and he didn't speak English, and
amazing.
he took real risk. He
Yeah,
changed my life, my children's life, my grandchild's life, because he took real risk.
mm.
So I always said, what I'm doing is really not that risky.
Oh, that's brilliant perspective, isn't it? It really is. It's yeah, similar with my family as well, actually, coming over a little bit earlier from Eastern Europe, actually, probably in around 1910 or, around that kind of time. But you're quite right. When you look at it through that lens, going to a strange country with, no money, no language, yeah, it does give that perspective, but clearly, you've gone through life being able to assess risk and, take on, exciting roles where you have put yourself out there at risk of failure, basically, so clearly that kind of mindset's really helped you to have some perspective and, and manage that, actually.
I don't know if I might have received this advice or counsel early in my career, or maybe it just developed, but I think I grew to find that most of the changes or roles, responsibilities you take on, really aren't as risky as you perceive them. And if you make your best effort and you connect with all the stakeholders and people that need to be aware of what's happening, and reach out for help, okay? Even if you don't achieve the target, you get great feedback for the effort that you put into it.
Mm.
And often if it's a really risky assignment, probably 4 or 5 other people have already failed in it. And so you have this ability to make progress, right? And if you do it, it's not so much what you do, it's how you do it that matters.
Mm. Mm. And explain that a little bit more in terms of how you do it, in terms of what that looks like.
I think a leader's role, and I don't mean leader in the sense of the business leader. You can be a leader as a sales guy or a scientist or the guy on the operations line in the plant. The leader's role is to create the culture. Okay? And if you create the culture where people can be engaged and feel that they're really part of something, okay, they're listened to, they're respected, and they're able to do their jobs, right? You trust them and they do their jobs, right? It's amazing what happens. It's just amazing what happens. So it started as when I was in a young sales, first entry-level sales role. And I figured out quickly that actually my job wasn't to sell more. My job was to make my customers successful. And so if I made my customers successful, everything else took care of itself. And at 27, I became a people manager, sales manager, had 13 people. And I really didn't know what to do. There was no training given at that time to how to be a people manager, et cetera. So I just thought to myself, well, if I make my salespeople successful, like I used to make my customers successful, then everything else will work out. And so my job was to make my salespeople successful. And so in a sense, I worked for them. They didn't work for me. Okay? And they felt it. My job was to knock the hurdles down so they could run faster, in a sense. Now, did I have to make some people changes? Sure, absolutely. There were a few people that just couldn't get there. And it wasn't because they didn't have talent. It's just that their talent didn't match the competencies required in the sales role. They should have been doing something else, product development, marketing, whatever it was. But when the talent matches and then there's the support there to make them successful, great things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is quite on the contrary when you sometimes see great salespeople elevated into senior sales positions, but sometimes approach it and come at it with an ego and come at it with such a different viewpoint from what you've just outlined, actually. And
and that's why you hear that people say, well, good salespeople usually don't make good sales managers. There's some truth in that, because if people can't get by their own, importance. But that doesn't, my whole philosophy there worked just as well when I was leading the global business. My job was to make the regional VPs successful and their teams and businesses successful. I always felt like I worked for my people, not the other way around.
Yeah, a great philosophy. And so when you think about the time at Monsanto, your career at Monsanto, 20 years there, and for you, you had really some interesting positions and roles there across the world. And I always remember you mentioning around going out to Brazil, it was at the time, not speaking the language, for a big role, moving the family out there, for instance, as well. And you had a successful career there. What were the key to really, what was the key to success there and to have the kind of career that you had at Monsanto at that time?
Yeah, it was a funny experience, because I was at the time I was a sales manager or something in Iowa, and I wrote a personal development plan, right, like most people do. And of course, I just aspirationally put something I'd like to have on there, which was an international assignment, just to broaden me, because I was basically a Midwest kid, kind of a redneck from Southern Missouri, very green, right, from a global perspective. And so I said, great, I'll get broadened. And it took 5 years to get that international assignment. And what I basically found out was I didn't have anything to offer an international region. Why did they need me? Why would they want to take on the expense, the hassle of somebody coming in who didn't know the culture, the language, the business? So I had to figure out a way to make myself actually valuable, okay, marketable to these international businesses, because they decide if they're going to bring somebody in or out.
How did you do that then?
It was marketing. I went into marketing roles, product, and I learned a lot about market research, branding, advertising, value propositions, new product launches, managing that product development cycle. And I did it in the US, of course, several examples of successful product launches. And all of a sudden then, the regions that were strong in sales but weak in marketing were interested. And the first one was Argentina. This was in the mid-90s. And of course, my view of an international assignment was, Canada or maybe Belgium, Brussels sounds like a nice spot to go. We'll go to Europe. No. It's Argentina. And they're 6 years into democracy, just coming out of hyperinflationary times. And they had about 1,000 people, of which 10 or 12 spoke good English. So I had to learn Spanish. It was part of the deal, because from day one, all of the meetings were conducted in Spanish. So
did you start from zero? Did you start from zero understanding of Spanish?
I think it was negative. It was negative. I had some high school French and it was worthless. You forget all that. But the greatest thing happened developmentally. When you have to learn a new language from zero, and it was absolutely critical to my business, my personal performance. You learn to listen, to understand, literally understand each word, okay? Now that's not how I'd listened in the past. Yeah. Up until that point in my life, I only listened to help me formulate my next, whatever I thought was a brilliant thought. So I was listening to respond. No. This was a complete change.
Listening to understand.
Oh my God, changed my life.
Really?
Because then I applied it to English.
Yeah.
I applied it to my mother tongue. The same principles, to really listen, to understand. The second thing that Argentine culture taught me was to be patient. And Americans in general are just not patient as a culture. We want things fast, quick. And I was an extreme example of that. I'm still, patience would never be listed as a strength for me, but I am so much better because of, you don't change a culture. And if there's a culture that's patient, it's Argentina. They will wait, they will suffer, they will allow a process to happen. Okay. Lunches take 2 to 3 hours, right? That used to drive me crazy. And then we'd stay at the office till 9 o'clock at night. I'm like, why are we spending all this time at lunch when we could be leaving early? No, you don't get it. That was part of how decisions were made, relationships were formed, engagement occurred. It was really an eye-opening experience that allowed me to take some developmental tools to other countries, regions in my life, for sure, even my personal life.
That's fantastic. Yeah, really, really interesting, actually. Even more patient. And, when you think about Asia, for instance, which is, also very interesting kind of culture. And how do you compare the challenges of working in Asia and then Argentina, for instance?
Totally different. And it's funny you bring up Asia, because I moved from Buenos Aires to Singapore was my next role, running kind of the majority of Asia Pacific. And I found that most of what I learned in Argentina, it didn't translate at all. The fact that you had to be culturally aware and sensitive, for sure. The listening to understand, for sure. But in Asia, there was this need to listen for what people did not say. Whereas in Argentina, they are very direct. You listen for what people say. Okay. So when you start listening to understand, you have to listen for what they don't say, which is a really interesting skill.
Yeah.
The highest challenge culture that I ever had to work in, but also one of the most rewarding experiences. There's always the meeting before the meeting and the meeting after the meeting. And you better have your people there because you're not going to be in either one of them, right? Because it's going to be all locals. You must save face in every single decision you make, organizationally, with customers. You think about saving face. You would never criticize somebody in front of a group, on your team, internally. I mean, there were just so many lessons. And that actually translated quite well. The Asia learning translated back to South America with Brazil or to Europe. That was invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they called it, I remember reading a book about this in Asia, listening to the wind, I've heard it referred to.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they don't say. It's great.
Exactly. I don't think I'll be very good in the Asian culture, to be honest. I'd struggle with that one. I think but no, it's great. And you can really see how great you would fit in global positions, you know, the experience and the knowledge of different cultures and different ways of working. It's very difficult in those environments to find people that are the right fit for those kind of global positions, actually. It really is.
You know, ultimately, almost every job is just about problem solving, right? Whether you're a doctor or a researcher or an educator, you're trying to solve problems, right? Helping somebody learn, whatever it might be. And in business, there's a level of problem solving. Okay, there's the the internal problems you have to solve to be successful as a company. There's the problem of getting the customer to engage with your product, whatever it might be, your service, and remain loyal, keeping them, right? That stickiness, right? Then there's the competitive complexity, right? Well, you're getting challenged all the time and people are trying to disrupt you and make your life crazy. And then when you layer on top the cultural complexity, okay, of trying to do all of that in 7 or 8 different, big regions around the world. And that motivated me, that stimulated me. Let's figure out the cultural complexity of all this other stuff. But now we're going to do it in China, or we're going to try to do that in Brazil, or we're going to, do that in Russia. What's that going to be like? That was fun. And having lived and worked in a bunch of these different places, I think certainly helped me better understand, better listen, for sure.
Yeah, they're great. And I always remember talking to Linda at DSM, who you I think had hired you in and you worked for, and I always remember him describing you as someone very selfless. And he said very unique in the context that you put at times you would put the company before you and what was right for your career and where you were at that time. And that I felt 20 years of, I haven't heard that too often, to be honest. And, it is a rarity. And I just wanted to explore that a little bit further. Like where did you put yourself, put the company first? And how did you, when you were working up that decision and you were working at your personal kind of goals and interests, how did you balance that with what the company needed?
Yeah, I had never thought about it about the balance part before, and we'll come back to that. I think the concept is that the business was more important than me for sure. And if that meant I wasn't going to do something in my career that maybe I would have enjoyed or liked, so be it. Because if the business isn't successful, then the rest of us can't be. And I think that goes all the way back to what I was telling you about with my customers. I remember I was maybe accused, or that might be too strong of a word, but I felt my customers were more important than my own business when I was a sales guy. Okay. And although, achieving my targets was never a challenge because of that philosophy, my customers rewarded me with loyalty in business. But this idea that maybe I took their side, but I never saw it that way. Because there's only one side, basically the customer side.
Yeah.
Was the way I saw it. It's like, what do you mean we and them? It's them. There is no we and them, it's them. So that just grew. And so when I was leading a global business, then, talking to the board about an acquisition or a strategy change, or it was always the business first. And that selflessness, I think, only builds your own credibility and the integrity you have internally, because frankly, the people throughout the organization, they know, they see it. They're not ignorant. They know what's going on and who really cares about the customer or them as, employees, team members. They know, they can tell. And who's in it for themselves versus who's in it for them, or who's in it for their customers. That was the model. So this idea of balance, I never thought about it that way, that there would be, how did I balance it? It was not a balance. It was only about, this was a philosophy, a principle, a value of how I wanted to lead.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. And what about other values as you did? I mean, you spoke about those, you spoke about some of the childhood, growing up, and some of the values you inherited from your parents. And you spoke there about some of that customer, selfless kind of value as well. Did you ever, across the organizations you work within, did you ever have to adapt to a different, when you were selecting which firms you were going to go and work for, how important was the fit with your way of doing things and culture with the company and the way they operated? And was there ever discourse around that or adjustments that needed to be made?
Yeah, there were, nobody gets everything that they want, right? It just doesn't work out that way. So there was always this conflict that I would run into. And it was either because there was a leader that saw it differently, or the leader saw it the same way, but he had this culture established that he wanted to change. Okay. And I was brought in to help do that. And it was always, and it always didn't work out. I mean, frankly, there were times where that just didn't, the conflict was too great, and I would change and do something else. Then, okay, you have to make a decision. What's more important, right? Because if you're not fulfilled, if it's not fun, frankly, that's what fulfillment was. If it's just not fun anymore, then you better do something else. But that was uncompromisable. Okay, that was always uncompromisable.
Yeah,
that we weren't going to have the right culture with the right type of focus, priority on, making the people in the organization successful, making our customers successful, and really getting the whole organization externally focused. Right?
Yeah.
Then, you better find something else to do. And that was always my advice to people. If you don't think you're a fit, okay, then don't suffer. Don't sit and suffer. Find something where you're a fit.
find something else. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Tell me, I'd always got the impression of your time at DSM, really splurging and opening the checkbook and buying companies left, right, and center at that time. That seemed to be such a great time. How many companies did you, on your watch, did you purchase when you were running the nutritional products business?
I think we did about 6 or 7 acquisitions in a 6-year period there, 5.5-year period. And in my time at Monsanto, I had done maybe 7 or 8, and about the same number at Tyson Foods. So there was this experience that had come from, one, how do you find a suitable acquisition? And then how do you make the fit happen so that they want to be acquired, and then do an integration that works for both the new company and the existing organization. So that skill set was something that I was really fortunate to. It was never planned, right? I just happened to be in the right place at the right time doing these acquisitions and integrations, and learned what a good process is. And not all of them were great. It's hard, right? That's a really hard thing. But for the most part, they did very well. They did very well, and they've gone on to be very successful. And the people that, if you can maintain, it's a great talent opportunity, right? An acquisition, but those people are, a bit shell shocked when you come into a new culture that's very different than another. And that just takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. And is that the most challenging aspect of it, from strategy and ideation all the way through to integration? Is it literally the amalgamation of the people and the cultures, and
that's it, without a doubt. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it was always interesting when you moved to Israel, and you became CEO of Keimer Biotech, and I know you were working with them on the board. But it was really striking, having spent your career in corporate global roles. You're now running a kind of CEO of a Israeli startup, biotech. And really, for you, what were the real differences? The challenges facing adapting to that culture and that way of working for you.
Yeah, this was kind of a crazy, and this was another one where you think back, are you really taking any risk here, right? And I was, when I left DSM, my plan was to basically, move on to consulting and board work, that type of things. And I was already on the board of this Israeli startup, ag tech. And when the board heard that I was leaving DSM, they said, hey, why don't you move to Israel for a couple of years and help us transition this business? We needed to expand one business in Brazil, a castor seed business. And I had a lot of experience, obviously, in Brazil, spoke the language. We needed to sell off another business, a vegetable seed, tomato, high value tomato and pepper business, which we ended up doing. And we had this core technology piece that was struggling a bit at the time, trying to figure out which crop it best fit into. It was a genomics platform to basically increase productivity using a genomics technology. And so the idea of moving to a startup that had 100 and some odd people and in the northern part of Israel and was quite a different change than anything I'd done before. Right? Luckily, I knew the team already because I'd been on the board a few years. I knew the strategy and the business. That was not an issue. So there was no integration piece there other than moving to Israel, which ended up being one of the greatest experiences of our lives for Ellen and I living there. You learn a lot about yourself when you live outside your own country, and you learn a lot about your own country too, good and bad. But you also learn a lot about the country you're moving to. And it's often not what you see on CNN or whatever, the BBC. It's quite different when you're there on the ground. And that was a tremendous learning experience, both personally and professionally. On the professional side, it was about cash management. Okay. That's what a startup is. You've got 5 to 10 people and they do everything, right? They're the same people, they're loaded. Focus is the number one challenge because there's just so many opportunities and things that need to be done. You can't do it all. And then cash, managing cash. What's your burn rate? Where you're at? How much revenue you're bringing in? And doing that was completely different than the type of experience you have when you're with a large multinational, and the focus is so much different. We had one meeting a week. That was it, one for 2 hours. Okay. Everything else was informal connections, and you just made decisions. You made them fast, right? You just literally made decisions.
So different. I'm sure it really helped knowing the team and knowing the board, right? That really helps. But it's always fascinating because I end up assessing and looking at a lot of people that have corporate backgrounds and their possible fit into startups. And not one size fits all. But what do you think, if you've had your experience broadly within corporate world, what things do you think make you successful? What are the competencies or things that you need to have in order to be successful in that environment, you think?
Well, clearly I brought some things from a corporate experience that helped, right? Structure and process, okay? Organizational design, talent management, and personal development for the team. Putting that together was hugely valuable. Just team building in general, the process of how do you get people to integrate and work together and engage. They'd never had anything like that. On the other hand, every strength to an excess is a weakness, right? When you overplay a strength, it's a weakness. And so there were times where I would come at it, whatever the issue was, and they would clearly say, "Oh, that's big company. That isn't going to work. That is not going to work." Right? But they all felt comfortable telling me, "Absolutely, that's not going to work." So we had to have that trust in each other that we could say, "Listen, that's not going to work here. We need to be more nimble, and we need to do it with a much lower budget."
Yeah.
Usually that's how it played.
Yeah.
But it was tremendous.
And how long does it adapt into, for you, quick to adapt to cultures and ways of working? Is it the same? You can adapt different countries, language. Is it just a mindset? Is it about, as you've identified earlier, for instance, were you picking it up, say after 18 months, a lot quicker than you were to start with?
Maybe you're right on that. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure about that, to be honest. It's just, if you have this ability, and I've worked with a number of people over the years that have very similar experiences to mine, if you have the ability to translate the adaptation phase, that when you come in new, because the first month or so is amazing because you're learning so much. It's so different, and you're just constantly surprised, right? And interested. The curiosity piece just dominates. But then it gets really hard. It gets really hard. That's the cultural shock piece, that you can't get things done. And you've lost all your systems and networks, everything, how you've made your life happen, both personally and professionally, is all gone. And you got to rebuild that. You get through that piece, then you make it, right? When you rebuild your systems, both professionally and personally in a new country, culture, environment, then it goes. Some people don't make it through that though, right?
That's taking a lot on, basically. Language, culture. It's, absolutely. But I'm sure you're richer for the experience, basically.
Well, for sure, because it's not just my life, my wife's life, but our children. They're all in kind of global roles, and a couple of them are going to be living outside the States here shortly, as soon as we get back to doing those kind of things. Change their lives. It was the biggest gift. through all of this. And it made me better professionally, having been in a startup and lived through the challenges that a startup has on a daily basis. To the point now where I'm the chairman of an Israeli-based startup. And I'm working with a private equity firm that has a growth equity business that looks at smaller businesses. And I can relate to those businesses and those teams in a way that most of the people that work for the PE firm cannot.
Yeah.
Because I've been there. I've been in their shoes. I understand it. And in some ways I work, I'm a filter for them. Going back to Payne Schwartz, the fantastic private equity firm that I'm able to work with. And I'm a great filter or bridge between the smaller businesses and the Payne Schwartz team, saying, hey, listen, they've got 5 people that are doing all the work here. We can't, we need to let them stay externally focused, and we can't treat them like a 200 million revenue or 400 million revenue portfolio company. It just doesn't work that way.
Doesn't work. Yeah, absolutely. And with regards to, we think about the theme of the podcast for me around connecting with a mission, as it were. And, you've spent your career in, really across that value chain, right? Completely, which has always been really interesting about your career, that food and ag value chain. Well, where have you had the most kind of connection with a mission cause, with the work that you've done, for instance?
Yeah, food, ag, nutrition. And I'm a microbiologist by training, but I worked in a lab for a very short period of time and found that there just wasn't enough team and complexity. I needed more of the external focus there than I could have ever got in research. Okay, but the fact that I've done it and I have that technical background allows me to interact with that technical community in a way, because what I like to do is find that technology, whatever that science is, and then figure out what's the value that we're creating with this and how do we capture it. Okay, that's the puzzle that's fun to solve, and then to do that on a global basis, right? Because it's going to be a little different in each part of the world. You have to tailor it, and you have to let those country teams tailor it. It doesn't come from the inside out. It comes from them back to you. So when I think about my career across food, ag, nutrition, it's really been what drives me there is, making the world a better place. So higher quality food at a lower cost, produced in a more sustainable way. And when you do that, and you can help a smallholder farmer in Indonesia, because with your seeds, he's able to increase his yields to a level he's never had before. And you give him a management system around those seeds, whatever crop it is. And with that incremental profit, he can send his children to school, to university, which he never thought he'd be able to do before. You change people's lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, you change people's lives. And, or if it's larger scale agriculture and you're able to do things more efficiently, more sustainably, and it helps lower the cost of food, so it makes it accessible for a greater portion of the people on this planet. All of that is just tremendously rewarding.
Yeah. And have you felt that throughout your career? That connection to, that farmer, to people eating healthier food, to the broader journey of bringing more sustainable food and nutrition to the people, as it were? Is it something that's kind of kept you going and kept you motivated?
Totally personal. And that story of the farmers, he told me that story. I was standing in his rice field. Okay. And today I'm fortunate enough to be on the board of Kemin Industries, which is a fantastic Iowa-based company that is very, very global. that works in the kind of ag and human nutrition space. My Proteins is an Israeli startup that's looking at taking sweet proteins, producing them via fermentation and substituting sugar with a protein, so a carb with a protein, which will solve probably the biggest global health problem we have. And these type of experiences are just so rewarding personally, not just professionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I've missed Ilan this year because I normally see him at traveling around the world, and haven't seen him this year, but hopefully I will next year. But Rick, listen, that's fantastic. I really thank you for your time. It's been an absolutely delight to, listen to some of your experiences and your journey and your influences, and really insightful. And thank you for sharing. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Simon. It's was a lot of fun, and I wish you a lot of success here with your podcast. I think it's pretty cool that you're doing this, and I look forward to listening.